good evening, and thank you for slipping into Sleepy Kitchen with me. Tonight, we're easing into a plain old problem people solved long before a refrigerator was part of the routine. How do you keep food safe when the day is warm, the shopping is done, and tomorrow's meal still matters? The answers were practical, not mysterious. People learned to buy time by changing the conditions. Spoilage depends on drying, salting, souring, sealing, and finding any corner of the house that stayed cooler than the rest. And if keeping things cold without electricity feels like a magic trick, here's a gentle surprise. Winter ice was often stacked in an ice house and packed with sawdust for insulation, so it could last for months into summer. If you'd like more gentle kitchen facts on another night, you're always welcome to subscribe and come back. For now, give yourself permission to rest, take a gentle breath, and enjoy the video at a softer pace. Let's begin. Food spoilage happens when microbes and natural enzymes have what they need to keep working on organic material. Bacteria and molds are too small to see, but they are common on raw ingredients, on hands, and on everyday surfaces. When water and nutrients are available, microbes multiply by dividing, and their growth leaves clues behind. They produce acids, gases, and other byproducts that change aroma, texture, and flavor, sometimes before the change is obvious. Enzymes inside plants and animals keep changing foods too, even when microbes are not the main driver. They break down structure and release new aromas, which is why fruit softens after harvest and why cut vegetables slowly lose crispness. Cooked foods keep shifting as time passes as well. Fats react with oxygen, and starches reorganize as they cool. Moist, nutrient-rich foods tend to change fastest. Soups, stews, cooked grains, and dairy are classic examples, because microbes can access what they need with very little effort. That is why preservation often begins with simple controls. You reduce water availability, lower temperature, or change the chemistry around the food so growth slows and breakdown becomes less aggressive. Before refrigeration was common, preservation mostly meant managing those pressures with whatever tools a kitchen had. If you remove enough water, cool the food, or change the environment with salt, sugar, acid, fermentation, or smoke, many spoilage organisms struggle to get started. The food can still hold on to much of its nourishment, but the rules around it change. So microbes cannot pull in water as easily, and enzymes do less work per hour. Preserved foods often arrive with new textures and stronger flavors because the method protects the food by changing it. Salt preserves by pulling usable water away from both the surface of food and the microbes that land there. When salt touches a wet ingredient, it dissolves into a concentrated brine. Water then moves toward that salty area until the outside becomes too dry and too salty for many bacteria to keep their internal balance. You can watch the same physics in a bowl of sliced vegetables. Sprinkle salt, and moisture beads up quickly. The surface liquid turns salty enough that growth slows, while the food becomes a bit denser and firmer. Because salt works through water movement, curing is really moisture control, and it points naturally toward drying. Drying preserves because most microbes cannot grow without accessible water, and a properly dried food does not offer enough of it. Dehydration does not need to remove every last trace of moisture. It only has to reduce moisture to a level where microbes cannot spread easily, and many enzyme reactions slow down. Drying can happen in sun, moving air, low heat, or a dehydrator. But the direction is the same: less available water, slower change. Dried foods become perishable again the moment they rehydrate, which is why people guard them from humidity with tight storage. Cold preservation works because low temperatures slow both microbial growth and the enzyme activity that keeps reshaping food over time. Even without freezing, a cool environment can reduce the speed of change dramatically. Many microbes prefer warmer conditions and become sluggish as temperatures drop, which is why ice, snow, cold cellars, and cool running water were useful tools long before modern refrigeration. The same processes still happen, but fewer happen per hour. Cold usually slows rather than kills, which is why it pairs well with saltiness, acidity, or dryness. In preservation, layers often matter. Acidic preservation works by making an environment where many spoilage bacteria do not function well, whether the acid is added or created inside the food. Vinegar does this directly. Acetic acid makes the food sour enough that many bacteria struggle to grow the way they would in plain water, which is the basic logic of pickles. Fermentation can reach a similar protective acidity in a more gradual, living way. Helpful microbes consume sugars and produce acids, such as lactic acid, that make the food increasingly sour as the process continues. As that acidity builds, it crowds out competitors and makes the environment less friendly to many spoilage organisms, as in sauerkraut or yogurt. pH is simply a scale for acidity, and a lower pH means a more acidic environment. Acid does not make a food immortal. It changes the landscape so fewer unwanted guests can thrive. Sugar preserves in a salt-like way because high concentrations bind water, leaving less free moisture for microbes to use. In jams, jellies, and syrups, sugar draws water into a dense solution where bacteria have trouble pulling enough moisture into their cells to keep growing normally. The same principle helps explain why honey and very sweet syrups keep so well. Sugar is making water less available, not making microbes disappear. That is why cleanliness and good covering still matter, especially at the surface where molds can start. Smoking preserves by building a protective outer layer that is both drier and less welcoming to spoilage. Airflow and gentle heat remove moisture from the surface, and smoke deposits compounds from burning wood that can slow microbial growth and slow oxidation, one pathway by which flavors turn stale or rancid. Because the protective effect is strongest on the outside, smoking is often combined with salting, drying, or cool storage, so the interior and exterior stay stable together. That stacking of methods is a clue. Traditional recipes feel deliberate because they are. Every preservation method trades something for time, because changing the environment around food usually changes the food itself. Salt can make foods firm and strongly salty until they are soaked or simmered. Drying can make foods tough until water is added back. Fermentation can bring a tang that fits some dishes better than others, along with aromas that can feel strong when eaten plain. Even cold storage has trade-offs because it depends on steady, cool conditions, and it slows rather than stops change. Food still has a timeline, and it still benefits from clean handling, smaller portions, and quick cooling after cooking. With those fundamentals in mind, salt is a good place to start getting specific because it is easy to see, easy to control, and it shows the core idea of preservation in one clear step. Dry salting preserves food by building a salty boundary right at the outside, where spoilage most often gets its first easy foothold. A scatter of salt crystals draws out a thin film of moisture, dissolves into it, and turns the surface into a concentrated brine. In that briny layer, usable water becomes harder for many common bacteria to access, so growth slows where it would otherwise start. As the salt binds water, proteins near the surface tighten a little, which is one reason cured foods can feel firmer before they taste evenly seasoned. It is quiet, patient chemistry at the edge, working without drama, just time and contact. From there, the change moves inward by diffusion, drifting from that salty outer zone toward the center. That timing is why thickness matters so much. A thin fish fillet can firm up and take on salt in a day or two, while a thick cut of pork may need several days before the middle is meaningfully salted. Surface area matters too. Smaller pieces and thinner cuts cure faster because more of the food is close to the salty edge. Dry salting teaches the core idea in a simple way. Preservation begins by changing conditions at the surface, then letting that change slowly travel inward. Brining answers that surface question by using immersion. It is salt preservation in liquid form, and its main advantage is evenness across the whole surface from the start. Because the salt is already dissolved, it reaches seams, cavities, and tight corners immediately. That makes whole birds, bone-in cuts, thick fish pieces, and other irregular shapes less likely to have undersalted pockets where spoilage could begin. Many recipes describe brines by weight, and for meats, you often see a common working range around 5 to 8% salt in the water. Milder brines suit shorter holds. Stronger brines suit longer holds, depending on the goal. Because water can move both ways, brining can pull some juices out even as it seasons, especially over longer holds. That is not automatically bad, but it is something you plan for because it affects texture and the final use. A brine can also include sugar or spices for flavor, but the preservative effect still comes from salt level and the time it has to work. That predictability is why brining shows up both in long-term preservation and in shorter, practical cures that set the stage for drying or smoking. It is not only about keeping food safe, it is also about making the next step behave the same way every time. Salt choice changes a cure mostly through measurement, not magic. The big difference is crystal size, because crystal size changes how much salt fits into a spoon. Fine table salt packs densely, while flaky salts trap air. So a tablespoon of fine salt can be dramatically heavier, sometimes approaching double, compared with the same spoonful of coarse or flaky salt. If you swap salts in a volume-based recipe without adjusting, you can quietly change the strength of the cure enough to affect both flavor and performance. That is why 2 tablespoons of salt can behave like 2 different recipes if the salt style changes. Additives can matter too. Some salts contain iodine or anti-caking agents. They are safe, but in delicate cures, they can be noticeable to sensitive palates. There are also curing salts that contain nitrite, used for specific preservation goals and the characteristic cured meat color. These blends are tinted pink, so they will not be mistaken for regular salt, and they must be measured precisely. In everyday kitchen terms, the simplest way to keep a brine or dry cure in the intended range is to weigh the salt, because weight stays honest even when crystals change shape. Salt pork shows how packing technique can be as important as the amount of salt, because salt needs continuous contact to keep conditions stable over time. Traditional storage often relied on careful layers, salt, pork, salt, so that as moisture left the meat, it became brine that stayed trapped around the pieces instead of draining away and leaving exposed spots. The goal was not a tidy container. It was an unbroken, salty environment. In a reliably cool place, heavily salted pork could keep for many months. And historical accounts describe stores intended to last through winter and toward the next harvest, though exact timelines depended on temperature, cut size, and how fully the meat stayed covered. Any area that rises above the brine or loses its salt coating becomes a weak point. That is where molds or surface bacteria are most likely to take hold first, because air exposure changes the balance at the boundary. The same logic, full contact and minimal exposed air, helps explain why certain fish became ideal candidates for salting and trade. When you can keep the salty environment continuous, you keep the rules steady. And steadiness is what preservation depends on. Lean fish, such as cod and herring, take well to salting because salt can move through their muscle efficiently, and there is less fat to complicate long storage. Once a fish is split or filleted, the distance from surface to center becomes small, often only a couple of centimeters, so salt can reach the middle before bacteria have time to multiply deeply in the flesh. Lowering available water also firms the texture, which makes the fish less fragile during transport and helps it dry more easily if it is finished with air drying. This is why many salted fish traditions pair salting with drying. Salt buys time and sets conditions, and drying reduces moisture even further for storage. When it is time to use salted fish, soaking is commonly used to remove excess salt and bring water back into the flesh. That gentle rehydration helps return the fish toward a more workable, cookable texture. The goal is not to erase the preservation step, but to make the food comfortable at the table again, balanced enough to taste good and soft enough to handle. Desalting works by diffusion in reverse. Fresh water draws salt outward, and changing the water keeps the outside low in salt, so the exchange continues instead of stalling once the soak water becomes briny. Time depends on thickness and how heavily the food was cured, from several hours to an overnight soak. Many traditional preparations also use a brief simmer in fresh water to soften texture and finish balancing seasoning. Cutting large pieces into smaller portions speeds the process because the salt has a shorter distance to travel out. But when fish carries more oil, a different kind of spoilage becomes the limiting factor, and salt alone starts to feel less complete. Fatty fish are harder to preserve with salt alone because fat can spoil by oxidation, a reaction that does not require much water and can keep progressing even when microbial growth is slowed. When oils react with oxygen, flavors drift toward rancidity over time, and warmth and light tend to speed that change. It is the same reason nuts and whole grain flours can taste stale sooner than refined ones. Even a well-salted oily fish may keep only a shorter span, unless it is protected from air and heat, because the limiting problem is the fat itself rather than bacterial growth. Since salting does not block oxygen, traditional preservation for oily fish often adds other barriers: smoking, more thorough drying, colder storage, or sealed containers that limit air exposure. This is one reason preservation methods often stack. You do not rely on one perfect shield. You build a few small advantages and let them support each other. Vegetables can be preserved with salt in two different ways, and the salt level largely decides which path you get. With heavier salting, vegetables shed water quickly, and the brine that forms becomes concentrated enough that many spoilage organisms struggle to thrive. This can keep textures crisp for a practical window even without added vinegar, because the environment at the surface becomes too salty and too low in available water for many unwanted microbes. With fermented vegetables, the salt is typically lower. Many recipes land around 2 to 3% by weight, so lactic acid bacteria can still work while many competitors are held back. As those helpful microbes consume sugars and produce acid, the growing sourness becomes the long-term protection. In practice, the simplest daily habit is also the most important one. Keep the vegetables submerged under their own brine. The surface exposed to air is where molds are most likely to appear, because the environment there is different, with more oxygen, less stable salinity, and more opportunity for the wrong microbes to settle. That is why cabbage can become sauerkraut, and cucumbers can become brined pickles with nothing more than salt, thyme, and the right conditions. The salt ratio is one of the key safety gates in salt preservation, because the most troublesome zone is not no salt or a lot of salt, but the middle where spoilage is slowed without being fully stopped. Too little salt leaves plenty of accessible moisture, so bacteria can still multiply. Too much salt can make food unpleasantly salty, and it can also stall a fermentation you were relying on to create protective acidity. Weight-based percentages make the scale of the change easy to see. A 1% difference is about 10 grams of salt per kilogram of food. If you only measure by spoons, crystal density can swing you by more than that, which is enough to change both safety and final flavor. Older methods were often learned by repetition and local climate, with hands and eyes calibrating what worked in that place. Modern guidance translates that experience into percentages by weight, so the same cure behaves similarly in a home kitchen. And once you understand salt as a way to manage water and time, drying becomes the next clear step, because it takes that same idea and pushes it even further toward a food that can wait quietly, with less and less moisture available for change. Sun drying works best when the air is warm, dry, and moving, because evaporation has to outrun anything that prefers a damp surface. Think of a tray in sunlight as a quiet race. Water is trying to lift away into the day, while molds, bacteria, and insects look for the easy comfort of moisture. When humidity is low and a breeze keeps brushing past the food, thin slices can shed water fast enough that the surface leaves its sticky stage quickly before trouble has much time to settle. In humid weather, the same tray moves slowly. Moisture can creep back overnight, and food spends longer in the damp middle zone where surface growth is more likely. Rain or heavy dew can re-wet the surface and reset the clock. That is why traditional sun drying leans on very thin cutting, sometimes light salting, and a breathable cover that keeps dust and insects off without trapping moisture. Fruit is one of the friendliest places to watch drying succeed. It begins with lots of water and a built-in balance of sugar and acid that becomes more concentrated as water leaves. Many fresh fruits are roughly 80 to 90% water, so a full bowl can collapse into a small pile of chewy pieces, dense enough to tuck into a jar or pouch. Grapes become raisins, plums become prunes, and apricots, peaches, apples, and mangoes become slices that pack tightly and travel well. The flavor shift is not only sweeter. Aroma compounds are concentrated into fewer bites, and acids stand out more clearly when they are no longer diluted by juice. Color changes belong to the story too, because drying is not only water leaving, it is time passing. Some fruits darken as browning reactions continue during a long dry, especially when slices meet oxygen. Other fruits stay lighter when makers use a simple anti-browning step that slows those reactions and helps fruit hold a brighter color. Either way, drying concentrates what is already there, and it asks you to manage what might change along the way. Meat can be preserved by drying as well, but it works most reliably when the meat is lean and cut thin, so moisture can escape fast and evenly. Jerky is a familiar example. Strips are trimmed of visible fat, salted or lightly cured, and dried until the texture is firm and the center is no longer soft or damp. The thickest point is always the last place to dry, which is why consistent thickness matters so much. With meat, dryness is not the only concern. Timing and safety matter too. So many modern home methods include a brief heat step before or after drying to reduce harmful bacteria. The core idea stays steady across equipment and traditions. Safer drying depends on thinness, steady airflow, and getting moisture low enough that microbes cannot easily restart. Fat is a limiting factor in dried meats because fat does not dry the way muscle does. It can also drift towards stale, rancid flavors over time, even when microbial growth is slowed, since oxidation can keep working in the background and warmth and light speed it up. That is why many long-lasting dried meat traditions begin with lean meat and add fat later, only when the food will be eaten sooner. The lean, dry base keeps well, and the richer elements come closer to the moment of eating. Air drying leans on ventilation and time more than heat, and steady airflow is the quiet hero. When air keeps moving, the surface does not stay wet for long, so water can drift away without cooking the food. That gentler approach helps herbs keep more of their character. It also lets certain cured foods dry without scorching sugars or melting fats the way high heat can. Because air drying is slower than hot drying, the main danger is that food stays damp long enough for molds to begin. Successful air drying depends on thin layers, spacing, and conditions that stay consistent instead of swinging from dry to damp. That is why air drying shows up in pantry basics like herbs, chilies, mushrooms, and some traditionally dried pastas. These foods can be spread out, given airflow, and left to settle into dryness without much fuss, as long as humidity stays under control. Smoke drying adds something extra to the surface while moisture leaves. It preserves by combining dehydration with smoke's natural protective compounds, so the outside becomes both drier and less welcoming to many microbes. As wood smolders, smoke carries mild acids and aromatic compounds that settle onto food and can slow the growth of some spoilage organisms. Meanwhile, warmth and moving air keep driving off moisture from the outer layers where spoilage often begins. Smoking can also slow some surface oxidation, which matters for foods that contain fat, even though it cannot prevent rancid flavors forever if storage is warm, bright, or airy. Smoke helps most where it lands, and it lands most strongly on the outside. That is why smoking works best when the smoke can reach all sides evenly and temperatures stay in the right band for drying rather than fast cooking. Traditional smokehouses were built to manage airflow and temperature, so food dried steadily instead of cooking too quickly. Food could be hung or laid out, so air circulated around every side. A small fire or a smoldering bed of coals produced a steady stream of smoke at controlled heat, and vents, high and low, helped keep that smoke moving instead of letting it stagnate. A clean smolder mattered because strong flames create hotter air and harsher smoke. That can darken and dry the outside too fast, while the inside stays wetter, shortening storage life and pushing flavor toward bitter notes and heavy soot, especially on delicate fish. Wood choice shapes smoke flavor, intensity, and how cleanly the smoke is produced. Hickory reads stronger and savory. Fruit woods, like apple or cherry, feel gentler and slightly sweet. Oak, maple, pecan, and mesquite each bring their own signature, from mild to bold. Hardwoods are preferred because they burn more predictably and produce cleaner smoke, while resin, heavy softwoods like pine are usually avoided. It also matters that the wood is clean and untreated, because paint, glue, and chemical preservatives do not belong anywhere near food. Drying reshapes storage and transport because removing water cuts weight and volume dramatically. Many fresh foods are mostly water, and once dried, you may end up near a third of the original weight, sometimes less, depending on how far moisture is taken down and how much fat remains. As a concrete benchmark, jerky makers often find that 3 to 4 pounds of fresh lean meat yield about 1 pound of finished jerky. Grapes lose most of their water on the way to raisins too, which is why dried fruit is so compact and easy to ship. That weight drop is why dried foods became staples for travel, winter stores, and trade routes when transport was slow and every extra pound mattered. Dried foods stay stable only as long as they stay dry, so storage is part of the method. Keep them sealed and away from steam, and watch for condensation when cold containers meet warm air. After drying, we turn to earth-cold storage and humidity control for fresh foods. Root cellars are a form of passive cold storage, a way of borrowing the ground's steady temperature so food can rest in calmer conditions than the open air. Soil warms and cools slowly, so a buried room changes temperature gradually, instead of swinging with every hot day or cold night. That steadiness matters because spoilage organisms multiply much faster during warm spikes, and repeated warming and cooling can create condensation that wets skins and invites surface growth. The core gift of a cellar is consistency. It turns a short shelf life into a longer window you can plan around, and it prepares the way for the more specific rules different foods need next. Traditional cellars support that consistency with simple building choices. Being underground is the first one. Thick walls, packed earth, and an entrance kept out of direct sun help the interior stay predictable. But underground coolness comes with a quiet risk: dampness. Cool does not have to mean wet, and good designs treat moisture as something to manage. Drainage keeps seepage from pooling, and airflow keeps the room from becoming stale and dripping. Below the frost line, Earth temperatures tend to remain relatively stable through the year. The frost line is the depth where soil stops freezing and thawing each winter. Below it, The ground behaves more like a slow heat battery than like open air. In many temperate regions, subsoil temperatures often sit around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, about 10 to 13 degrees Celsius, though soil type, depth, and local climate can shift the range. This middle cold zone slows many bacteria and molds and reduces enzyme activity that keeps softening produce after harvest. At the same time, it is usually warm enough to avoid freezing damage. Ice crystals can rupture plant cells, and once thawed, produce can become watery and fragile. Even when outside temperatures swing widely, the subsoil changes far more slowly, which is why a cellar can feel predictably cool for months. Root vegetables are especially good candidates for cellar storage because they are still alive after harvest, resting in a low-energy state called dormancy. Potatoes, carrots, beets, turnips, parsnips, and rutabagas were built to wait, holding energy as starch and sugar until growth conditions return. Even in storage, they keep respiring slowly. They use oxygen and release carbon dioxide, moisture, and a small amount of heat as they burn stored fuel. This is why intact skins matter so much. A cut or bruise is both a shortcut for microbes and a fast lane for moisture loss. Many growers also cure certain crops briefly after harvest, so skins toughen and tiny scrapes seal. That step supports longer cellar life by making the surface more resilient and less permeable. Another common practice is removing leafy tops from carrots and beets, because greens keep pulling moisture from the root even after harvest and can speed shriveling. The calmer and more intact the tissue stays, the longer it can remain dormant. Humidity is one of the trickiest balancing acts in cellar storage, high enough to prevent shriveling, but not so wet that molds and soft rot take over. Roots lose water steadily through their skins. Over weeks, that slow loss adds up, turning crisp carrots limp and smooth beets wrinkled even when temperature stays ideal. For that reason, root cellars meant for vegetables are often kept noticeably humid compared with a heated home. Many storage guides aim roughly in the 85 to 95% range for many root crops. High, but not dripping. That is the feel you are aiming for. The trade-off is that trapped moisture encourages mold. This is why breathable containers show up again and again, and why sealed plastic is usually discouraged for long holds. Plastic can trap condensation right against the skin, creating the small wet zone molds like best. In practical terms, people separate produce into bins or crates with air gaps so damp air can move instead of settling into pockets. Separation also limits spread. One wet or damaged item is less likely to keep its neighbors wet and less likely to seed them with spoilage. Not every crop wants the same air, and apples are a classic special case. Apples release ethylene, a natural plant hormone that signals ripening. In storage, ethylene can push nearby items toward faster ripening and earlier breakdown, even in cool air. The effect is stronger in enclosed spaces and when fruit is bruised or overripe. Damaged apples tend to release more ethylene and also decay faster on their own. That is why apples are often stored apart from vegetables and checked often, with a single bruised apple treated like a small alarm bell. Ethylene sensitivity varies by crop, so keeping apples boxed and separated helps protect the rest of the cellar from invisible changes in the air. Onions and garlic belong in their own category too, because they store best in cool, dry, well-ventilated conditions. The damp cold that suits carrots can be a problem for bulbs. Their papery outer layers protect them when they stay dry. But in humid air, those skins can trap moisture at the neck and encourage rot, especially if the bulbs were not fully cured. Variety matters as well. Sweet, high-moisture onions generally keep for a shorter time than properly cured storage onions. This is why onions and garlic are often hung, braided, or kept in mesh or slatted containers that let air circulate on all sides. In a well-run storage space, different foods often live in different microclimates, each one placed where temperature and humidity suit it best. Ventilation is the quiet workhorse of a root cellar because stored produce changes the air around it through respiration. As vegetables and fruits use oxygen, they release carbon dioxide and water vapor. In a tightly sealed space, those can build up, humidity rises, and condensation forms on cool surfaces. Condensation is not just harmless dampness. It creates small wet zones where molds can start on skins and where rot can spread from one item to the next. Ventilation also carries away a little heat, which matters because a large pile of produce can warm itself slightly as it respires. The goal is steady airflow, not a drying wind. Packing and layering add another calm layer of protection. Putting produce in clean sand, sawdust, or similar food-safe materials can slow spoilage by preventing direct contact and buffering moisture changes around each piece. When roots touch, a single soft spot can spread quickly because moisture and microbes move from one surface to the next. A thin barrier makes that transfer harder. Details matter. Sand should be clean, and sawdust should come from untreated wood. Carrots and parsnips are often packed, so each piece is surrounded, while potatoes are more commonly stored in slatted crates that emphasize airflow over tight packing. A well-managed root cellar can keep many foods usable from the fall harvest into early spring, but outcomes depend on careful selection and a little ongoing attention. Storage works best when only intact, mature produce goes in. Cuts, bruises, and insect damage rarely improve in cold storage, and they often become the first point of rot. Periodic sorting is a preservation method in its own right. Rotating older items forward and keeping foods in their preferred zones can stretch supplies for months, bridging the gap until spring growth returns. And once you can feel that steady coolness doing its work, it makes sense that people eventually tried to store cold itself, not just hide from heat, by saving winter as blocks of natural ice. Ice harvesting worked because winter could lay a thick sheet of ice over still water, and that sheet could be treated like a seasonal ingredient, gathered at the right moment and saved for later. Quiet ponds and calm lakes were especially useful because the surface could freeze evenly. Fast-moving water resists freezing, breaks up forming crystals, and tends to create thinner, weaker ice. In the ice trade, thickness was the whole game. A thin skim cracks easily and melts quickly. A thicker sheet can be cut into blocks that feel like building material, not fragile glass. And they melt more slowly because large pieces have less surface area per pound. Snow cover mattered too. Snow insulates ice from colder air and can slow thickening. So some crews cleared sections so the sheet could grow stronger and more uniform. Harvesting waited for deep, steady cold, then turned a frozen surface into a supply that could be measured, moved, and stacked. Many crews preferred clean, clear ice because trapped dirt and bubbles can make blocks weaker and less useful in an icebox. And they also tend to look and store worse than dense, clear sheets. Clear, dense sheets behave predictably, heavy in the hand, and slow to give up their cold. Cutting a frozen sheet into usable blocks depended on tools designed for repeatable rectangles. Ice plows scored long, straight grooves in a grid. Long-toothed ice saws followed those lines and cut down through inches without letting cracks wander into the next row. A chisel or spud bar could then pop blocks free along the scores, so the ice broke where you asked it to, instead of splitting unpredictably. The grid was not only tidy, it kept thousands of pieces consistent, so storage stacks and delivery routines feel steady and repeatable. Blocks were usually sized so 1 or 2 people could handle them with ice tongs and hooks. Depending on thickness and dimensions, a single block could weigh close to 100 pounds, like wrestling a small suitcase made of stone. Standard sizes made storage and delivery predictable, and predictability mattered because cutting was only the beginning. Once blocks were free, the real work was moving them quickly and carefully before the weather changed. Getting ice from water to storage was mainly a logistics problem, so successful operations focused on flow instead of repeated heavy lifting. Blocks could be guided along channels, cut into the sheet, floated or slid toward shore, and pulled onto ramps or simple conveyors that carried them up to higher ground. Sleds and wagons handled longer distances, and in some places, rail lines carried ice from rural ponds into towns that could not harvest enough locally. Ice is bulky, even when it is free, and distance turns free into expensive very quickly. Speed mattered because a sunny day or a late-season thaw could soften the surface and make handling messy. Harvesting often ran like an assembly line while the cold held. A dropped block can crack, and cracked ice melts faster because it exposes thin edges and extra surface. Careful handling protected the ice before it ever reached storage, because loss begins at corners, fractures, and warm air. The aim was to deliver the cold to the ice house with as little waste as possible. An ice house preserved ice by slowing heat transfer from the outside world into the stack. It was a quiet battle against warmth, fought with thick barriers and trapped air. Many ice houses used heavy walls, and some were double-walled so the cavity could be packed with sawdust, straw, or other dry plant material. Dry packing traps air the way a puffy jacket does, and trapped air conducts heat poorly, so warmth moves inward far more slowly than it would in a plain shed. Doors were built to open briefly and seal well to limit warm air exchange. Sawdust also helped keep blocks from freezing into one solid mass, so you could remove ice in smaller amounts without chiseling a whole wall apart. But insulation only works when it stays dry. Wet packing loses its value and can rot wood and invite odors. That is why ice houses were designed with drainage and with few openings. Drainage mattered because meltwater speeds melting when it pools. Water conducts heat better than air, so a puddle touching the stack acts like a warmer contact surface. Sloped floors, gravel beds, channels, or drains helped meltwater leave quickly instead of soaking insulation. Stacking was another advantage. Ice was packed in tight layers, sometimes with insulation between blocks, because the shape of the mass changes how quickly it melts. Packing blocks closely reduces the warm air that can move between them. Filling gaps limits convection, the small circulating airflow that speeds warming inside any cavity. Fractured ice melts faster because it exposes fresh surfaces and creates thin edges that disappear quickly. so careful handling and stable stacks supported longer storage. The same surface area logic explains why a big block in a cooler lasts longer than a bag of cubes at the same weight. A well-built ice house could keep usable ice through summer, and in favorable conditions, some stores lasted into the next winter. Ice has a quiet advantage. As it melts, it absorbs a large amount of heat. If you slow the heat coming in, melting happens gradually, like a slow-release cold battery. Thick walls reduce daily heat flow. Tight packing reduces exposed surface. Drainage keeps remaining ice from sitting in warmer water that accelerates loss. The stack shrinks in a predictable pattern, and that predictability changes what people can plan. The supply still had to be managed. Opening the door adds warm air, so people planned withdrawals, opened briefly, and often used the oldest and most exposed ice first. Harvesting itself was hard, risky work in bitter weather, in a place where open water still existed beneath the surface. A sheet can look solid while hiding weak zones near inlets, moving water, or areas where the snow slowed freezing. Workers tested thickness as they went. Sharp tools and shifting blocks demanded careful routines, and cold fatigue made hands clumsy if people were not vigilant. The weight and risk helped turn ice into a paid commodity. Urban delivery then turned stored winter ice into a household service, and the tool that made it useful was the icebox. Dealers brought blocks by wagon and later by truck, and many families bought ice on a schedule in warm months because a block melts continuously. Cold had to be renewed, not purchased once. An icebox was a cabinet with the ice in an upper compartment so chilled, denser air could sink to shelves below while meltwater drained away. Temperatures inside were never perfectly even. The coldest zone stayed closest to the ice, so the most delicate foods were kept there while sturdier items sat lower. Once people could keep food cold for days instead of hours, other preservation methods could be managed with more control. Fermentation could be guided more deliberately instead of feeling like a race against spoilage. The icebox itself needed care. Keeping the interior clean and as dry as possible helped prevent mildew and off odors. Drainage had to work. Shelves needed wiping. For many kitchens, that simple cabinet made summer feel steadier, like winter's cold had been tucked into the house and was melting slowly, one careful block at a time. Fermentation preserves food by making room for the right helpers to do their work first. Friendly bacteria, or yeast, find sugars, eat that easy fuel, and leave behind acids, alcohol, and carbon dioxide. Those byproducts change flavor, aroma, and texture, but they also change stability because the environment around the food shifts. When conditions suit them, helpful microbes reproduce quickly and crowd out competitors, like a fast-growing ground cover that leaves little space for weeds. If you have watched a jar begin to fizz, or noticed a gentle sourness deepen over a few days, you have seen that takeover in motion. Once the basic idea is clear, the next calm question is simple. What do acids and alcohol actually do to the microbes you do not want? Acidity is one of fermentation's strongest safety levers because many common spoilage bacteria slow down sharply as pH drops. A widely used food safety benchmark is pH 4.6 because the bacterium that can produce botulinum toxin cannot grow below that point. Many properly finished fermented foods naturally fall under that line. That does not make a ferment immune to everything, and it does not replace clean jars, clean hands and good starting ingredients. It means the neighborhood has changed in a way that blocks major risks and discourages many common spoilers. People sometimes call that stage self-protecting, not because nothing can ever go wrong, but because the conditions now favor safety far more than they did at the start. Sauerkraut is a clear example of this steady protection. It begins when cabbage is salted and pressed enough to release liquid. That liquid becomes brine, and brine is more than moisture. It is a boundary that surrounds the cabbage and keeps conditions steady. Keeping the cabbage submerged limits oxygen contact, which makes it harder for many spoilage organisms to thrive. Meanwhile, lactic acid bacteria have a better lane to work in salty, low oxygen conditions. Over days to weeks, those bacteria convert cabbage sugars into lactic acid. The brine turns tangier, the pH gradually drops, and the cabbage becomes more stable, not through force, but through a slow shift in the neighborhood around the food. The method looks almost too simple: salt, press, wait. But its reliability depends on who wins early. Lactic acid bacteria, often grouped under names like lactobacillus, are common on raw vegetables and in the surrounding environment. Salt helps them win the first round. A moderate salt level discourages many unwanted bacteria while still allowing lactic acid bacteria to reproduce and acidify the brine. So the population shifts toward microbes that tolerate salt and low oxygen. Many vegetable ferments follow a natural succession. Early strains start the acid drop, and later strains tolerate the increasing acidity and finish the job. That is why consistent salt and full submersion are not just tradition. They shape which microbes dominate and how quickly the ferment moves into a safer, more stable range. Once the right microbes are in charge, fermentation can change food in ways that go beyond shelf life. Microbes can improve digestibility by breaking down compounds humans do not always process well. In some cases, fermentation reduces phytates in grains and legumes, which can make certain minerals more available. It can also break down some complex carbohydrates that bother sensitive stomachs, turning a food that feels heavy into one that sits more easily. Vitamin shifts vary, though some ferments increase certain B vitamins. Natto is known for vitamin K2, while plant-based vitamin B12 claims are inconsistent and depend on the microbes used. The practical takeaway is simple. Fermentation does not upgrade every nutrient, but it often shifts nutrition, texture, and flavor in useful directions. Kimchi, miso, and yogurt show how fermentation adapts to vegetables, legumes, and dairy while using the same core strategy, controlled microbial takeover. Kimchi is typically a salted vegetable ferment where lactic acid bacteria create acidity and carbon dioxide. Seasonings like garlic, chili, and ginger mainly shape flavor, and they can nudge which microbes gain an early advantage. But the foundation stays steady: salt, thyme, and an environment that favors souring bacteria. Some batches develop a gentle fizz because carbon dioxide becomes trapped in the brine, and that gas is another small hurdle for certain spoilers. Miso uses a different set of helpers. It often begins with koji, a culture that includes a mold such as Aspergillus oryzae, which helps break down proteins and starches in soybeans and grains into simpler compounds. That breakdown builds sweetness, depth, and umami, turning beans and grain into a paste that tastes larger than its parts. Salt then guides stability. When salt levels are high enough and the ferment is managed well, miso can keep a long time, even at room temperature. because the environment becomes unfriendly to many spoilers. Yogurt returns to lactic acid again, but in milk. Specific bacterial cultures convert lactose into lactic acid, and as acidity rises, milk proteins thicken and set. The pH drops, the texture turns creamy, and the dairy becomes slower to spoil than it was at the start. When the fermentation target is sugar in liquid form, the same strategy appears as alcoholic preservation. Yeast converts sugars into alcohol and carbon dioxide. That reduces easy fuel while creating an environment many microbes tolerate poorly. Beer, cider, and wine do not stay stable only because of alcohol. They also tend to be acidic, and they are often stored in sealed containers that limit new contamination. Alcohol level matters. Low alcohol drinks spoil more readily, while higher levels become harder for bacteria to tolerate. In carbonated drinks kept under pressure, dissolved carbon dioxide adds another hurdle, stacking advantages instead of relying on one lock. Fermentation is also a flavor engine. Tang is not decorative. It is evidence that sugars have been turned into acids that lower pH and reshape who can survive. Texture follows chemistry. Cabbage softens as cell walls relax in acid and salt. Dairy thickens as proteins reorganize in the more acidic setting. Some ferments sparkle because carbon dioxide gets trapped. These bold notes are why many traditions pair ferments with starches, fats, or meats that soften acidity and round the edges. Because microbes respond strongly to their environment, temperature is the most practical control knob. It shapes who grows fastest and how quickly acidity develops. Warmth speeds activity, which can be helpful, but too much warmth can favor yeasts or off-track bacteria that create excess gas, soft textures, slime, or harsh aromas before the pH drops enough to protect the food. Cold slows everything down. That can preserve crunch and keep flavors clean. But if it is too cold, the ferment can stall and linger in the not acidic yet zone. Many everyday ferments do best at a moderate room temperature. Once the desired acidity is reached, moving the jar colder slows further change and extends the best eating window. With fermentation covered, the next preservation leap is almost the opposite approach. Instead of inviting helpful microbes to take over, you use heat and sealing to lock food away from new microbes entirely. Nicholas Appert is widely credited with kickstarting canning in the early 1800s after he showed that food could keep far longer when it was sealed in a container and heated. The breakthrough was not a new ingredient. It was a new boundary. Heat could reduce the organisms that cause spoilage, and a closed container could keep new ones from entering. So time became more generous. Long before people spoke comfortably about microbes, this approach was valuable for military and naval supplies, where stable stores of food were a logistical breakthrough. Appert's early work used glass containers with tight closures. Later systems refined the same principle with better seals and more consistent heating. Every jar, lid, and processing step is trying to create an interior space that stays quiet after the jar is finished, with fewer living microbes and fewer opportunities for recontamination. Canning works because heat and sealing do different jobs. Heat reduces many bacteria, yeasts, and molds, and it also slows enzyme activity that keeps changing texture and flavor. Sealing prevents recontamination afterward. During heating, air inside the jar expands and some of it escapes as the contents warm. As the jar cools, the remaining air contracts and forms a partial vacuum that helps hold the lid down. That vacuum hold is a pressure difference, similar to how a suction cup clings to a smooth surface. So the lid settles into place and holds on its own as the jar cools. This is why canning is picky about time, temperature, and a proper seal. The method depends on both steps, not just one. A jar can seal even when processing was not sufficient, so the seal is necessary, but it is not the whole story. Heat without a seal would only reset the food briefly. Then the jar would start swapping air and microbes with the room again. Metal cans became important because they were durable, stackable, and suited to mass production. Glass can break in transport, and early closures were not always consistent at scale. Metal followed the same heat and seal logic, but it required seams that stayed airtight through heating, cooling, and storage. Many are coated inside to reduce corrosion. For home kitchens, the turning point was a jar system that made sealing repeatable without specialized tools. Home canning expanded when jars and lids became standardized, and the mason jar, patented in 1858, became a major part of that story. Standard jar mouths meant standard lids, so cooks could buy parts that fit instead of improvising closures each season. A threaded rim allowed a consistent closure during processing. Over time, the question shifted from, "How do I seal this?" to what processing method matches this food. The common two-piece lid system supports that shift because it separates positioning the seal from holding it in place. The flat lid has a sealing compound that softens with heat and bonds to the jar rim as the jar cools. The metal band holds the lid snug during processing, but it is not meant to be the long-term seal by itself. During heating, steam can vent from under the lid, which helps drive out air. Then the seal sets during cooling, and the lid is pulled down by the pressure difference inside the jar. A properly sealed lid stays slightly concave, and that shape becomes a simple visual cue. If the lid flexes up and down when you press it, the seal is not secure. Once those mechanics make sense, the safety difference between boiling water canning and pressure canning becomes clear, because it is mostly about temperature. Boiling water canning is limited by the temperature of boiling water. At sea level, that is about 212 degrees Fahrenheit, or 100 degrees Celsius. You cannot make the inside of a jar hotter than the boiling water around it without changing pressure, because a water bath cannot go above that point. It is best suited to foods that already have a second safety barrier, acidity. High acid foods, like many fruits, jams, jellies, and properly acidified pickles, can often be processed safely in boiling water when the method is designed for them. The heat reduces microbes, and the acidity makes it harder for the most concerning ones to grow later. Pressure canning exists because low-acid foods need higher temperatures to reliably inactivate more heat-resistant spores. Increasing pressure raises the boiling point of water, so a pressure canner can reach roughly 240 degrees Fahrenheit, about 116 degrees Celsius, depending on pressure and altitude. That higher heat is the point. Low-acid foods, like plain vegetables, meats, seafood, and many soups, require pressure canning because they can support bacteria that produce serious toxins in sealed, oxygen-limited environments. The quiet danger is not ordinary souring or visible mold. It is something that can develop without obvious warning signs when conditions are right. Pressure canning is built around time, temperature, and the way heat travels. The process must hold the target heat long enough for heat to penetrate to the coldest point in the jar, often the center of a dense pack, heat moves more slowly through thick purees than through broth. So jar size, food thickness, headspace, and packing style matter. Shortcuts can leave the center cooler than it needs to be, even if the lid seals perfectly. That is why processing times and correct use matter, and why instructions also include altitude adjustments. Botulism risk comes from the bacterium, Clostridium botulinum, which can produce a potent toxin in low oxygen, low acid environments if spores survive and then grow. Those spores are tough and can survive boiling temperatures. That is why boiling water canning is not considered sufficient for low-acid foods unless the food has been properly acidified by a method designed for that purpose. This is also why you hear the pH number 4.6 so often. Below that acidity level, C. botulinum cannot grow and produce toxin, so the risk profile changes. It is best to treat that as a process rule, not something you judge by smell or appearance. High-acid foods are often the easier entry point for home canning because acidity is a strong preservation barrier. Fruits, many fruit juices, jams, jellies, and properly acidified tomatoes, and pickles often fall into that lane. Acidity does not replace heat. It works with heat, lowering the chance that spores become a problem later, and making it harder for many spoilage bacteria to recover, even if a few survivors remain. Lemon juice or vinegar may be used to bring acidity into a safe range for borderline foods. In canning, some acids are there for flavor, and some are there because the method depends on them. That is why trusted recipes are treated as safety documents, not just cooking suggestions. Add vinegar because it tastes good, and add vinegar because the process requires it are not the same instruction. Correctly canned foods can last a long time, but storage and simple checks keep that shelf life predictable. Cool, dark storage slows quality loss because heat and light speed changes in color, flavor, and texture even when the jar remains sealed and safe. Many people aim to use home-canned goods within about a year for best quality, though properly processed jars can remain sealed longer. Before using a jar, check the seal first. A lid that is bulging, leaking, or unsealed is a clear do not use signal. Any spurting, strong off odors, or unusual foaming should be treated as a reason to discard without tasting. When you view canning as controlled heat plus a reliable seal, it becomes a natural bridge to the next preservation tool, one that controls water without needing a pressure gauge at all, the dense, water-binding world of sugar and honey. Sugar preserves food by reducing how much water is truly available for microbes to use, even when the food still feels moist to us. In a sugary solution, water molecules spend their time clustered around sugar molecules, and that makes it harder for bacteria and molds to pull in enough free water to grow and multiply normally. That's why a very sweet jam can sit for a while without spoiling the way plain fruit puree would, even though both contain fruit and water. A useful kitchen comparison is wet sand versus flowing water. Both are wet, but only one offers water that moves easily and supports quick change. Once you see sugar as a water manager, it becomes easier to understand why concentration, not just sweetness, is what decides shelf life. Concentration is the key. A high sugar concentration creates an inhospitable environment for many microbes, and many traditional preserves aim for a very sweet lane, often landing somewhere above roughly 50 to 60% sugar in the finished product. That range shows up because as dissolved sugar rises, the conditions shift. Most bacteria struggle to grow well, leaving molds and some yeasts as the main concerns instead. This is also why reduced sugar jams are usually treated as shorter life products unless they are carefully processed and stored cold. It isn't that reduced sugar preserves are wrong. It's that lowering sugar raises available water again, and that changes the timeline. In the kitchen, sweetness is doing a safety job as well as a flavor job, so changing the sugar level changes the rules of storage. When sugar is doing that work inside a fruit mixture, the next ingredient that decides texture and supports stability by keeping the preserve unified is the natural gelling agent called pectin. Jams and jellies are preserved fruit because cooking concentrates sugar and helps a gel structure form, turning juicy fruit into something spreadable and settled. Jam typically uses crushed or chopped fruit and keeps more texture. Jelly is usually made from fruit juice for a clearer, firmer set, but both rely on the same trio: fruit, sugar, and acid, heated to concentrate and set. As a pot of jam boils, water evaporates and the mixture thickens. The sugar concentration rises. The final product becomes less friendly to microbial growth, and the gel reduces separation, so the preserve feels finished rather than syrupy. Timing matters, because undercooking leaves too much water for stability and too soft a set. Overcooking can darken flavor and create a stiff, sticky set that's hard to spread. That's why recipes often use temperature or visual cues. The target is a predictable concentration and gel formation, not a particular number of minutes. You can hear it too in the way the boil changes, from loud and watery to thicker, slower bubbles that rise and pop with a softer sound. Once the preserve is cooked, the way it sets depends heavily on how pectin behaves. Pectin is a natural carbohydrate in many fruits that helps jam set into a gel when sugar and acid are in the right range. In plain language, pectin molecules can form a loose network that traps water. Sugar helps by pulling water away from pectin, so the molecules can link up instead of staying fully dissolved. Acid helps as well by reducing repulsion between pectin strands, which is why many jam recipes add lemon juice even when the fruit already tastes tart. That's the set. That's the structure. Different fruits contain different pectin levels. Apples, citrus peel, and some berries tend to have more. Strawberries and peaches often benefit from added pectin for a firm set, especially if you want a sliceable jam rather than a soft, spoonable one. Ripeness matters too. Very ripe fruit tends to have less effective pectin, which is one reason some cooks mix a little slightly underripe fruit into a batch, enough to support structure without changing flavor much. The practical result is that jam texture isn't a mystery. It's a predictable interaction between fruit type, sugar level, acidity, and how far you concentrate the mixture. Candying shows sugar working through time and diffusion instead of quick boiling. Candying preserves by replacing some of the fruit's water with dense sugar syrup, creating pieces that are sweet, firm, and harder for microbes to use. Rather than cooking everything down in one fast step, candying often uses repeated soaks in increasingly concentrated syrup. Sugar moves inward gradually, while water moves outward. It's slow, but it's gentle on the fruit. That stepwise approach helps the fruit keep its shape, because sudden exposure to very strong syrup can collapse delicate tissues or make the outside leathery before the inside has changed. Over days, the fruit can become translucent and glossy, with a surface that dries into a protective layer once the final syrup is drained. Citrus peel is a classic candidate because its structure holds up well, and its bitterness can be balanced by sugar. Cherries, pineapple, and ginger are also common. In candying, you can almost feel the logic with your fingertips. The pieces grow firmer as the syrup grows heavier, as if the fruit is slowly trading juice for shine. Honey preserves in a slightly different way than many syrups because it starts with extremely low water content and has a few natural antimicrobial quirks beyond sugar concentration alone. Most honey sits around 17 to 18% water, which means it is already too dry for most microbes to grow, and it remains stable for long periods when kept sealed from humidity. Honey is also acidic, and when diluted, it can produce small amounts of hydrogen peroxide, both of which can help discourage microbial growth under some conditions. But the key detail is dilution. Honey's famous shelf life belongs to honey itself. Once it is mixed into a wetter food, its preservative advantage depends on whether the final mixture still has low enough available water. That's why honey can help preserve certain fruits when it's used in heavy concentration or as part of a cooked preserve. But a thin honey drizzle on fresh fruit is not preservation in the traditional sense. It's flavor, its gloss, its sweetness. Preservation only happens when water availability stays low enough to keep microbes from thriving. Many historical accounts describe honey being used to help store fruit and other foods, and the method can work well when concentration and storage conditions cooperate. When fruit is fully submerged in a dense honey mixture and kept cool and sealed, microbial growth can be slowed compared with plain fruit because the environment is sweet, acidic, and water-limited. But if the fruit releases enough juice to dilute the honey substantially, the mixture can become more hospitable to yeasts. At that point, you may see fermentation begin, bubbles, foam, and alcohol developing over time. In a sense, a honey preserve can quietly turn into a fermentation starter if water content rises. This is why some traditional honey fruit preparations were meant to be eaten within a practical window rather than stored indefinitely at room temperature. The final water balance decides what happens next. Fruit leather combines sugar and dehydration in one calm step. It preserves fruit by spreading puree thin and drying it into a flexible sheet. Because the layer is thin, moisture escapes evenly. And once it is dry enough, the result becomes shelf-stable as long as it stays protected from humidity. The sweet-tart balance intensifies, and the texture becomes chewy rather than juicy, which is why fruit leather packs well for travel and quick snacks. Some leathers are made with no added sugar, relying on the fruit's own sweetness. Others add sugar or honey mainly for taste and texture, since a higher sugar content can help prevent cracking and adds another water-binding advantage. Storage still matters, because leather that absorbs moisture becomes sticky, and stickiness is a sign the water availability is climbing again. Dried food stays stable only as long as it stays dry, and fruit leather is a soft reminder of that rule. Thin shapes, sheets, slices, small pieces change faster and more evenly than thick ones, which is why they appear again and again in preservation traditions. Sugar preservation also changes flavor and structure in a predictable direction. Fresh fruit balances sugar with water, acid, aroma, and air. When you turn it into jam, candy, or leather, water decreases and sugar becomes the dominant note. Subtle floral aromas can slide into the background, while tangy acids feel sharper because they are less diluted. Texture changes alongside flavor. Jam becomes spreadable through gel formation. Candied fruit becomes firm and glossy as sugar replaces water, and leather becomes dense and chewy because the fruit has been flattened and dehydrated. These changes aren't side effects. They're part of why these foods became beloved pantry staples, rather than emergency rations. Once sugar shows how preservation can be built on excluding water, the next method flips the strategy and excludes air instead. By sealing cooked foods under fat so oxygen and new microbes have a harder time reaching them at all. Fat sealing preserves cooked food by covering it with a solid layer that blocks air and slows recontamination. Imagine a pot of cooked meat or poultry packed into a crock, then topped with melted fat. As the fat cools, it becomes a firm cap, smooth, pale, and quiet, limiting oxygen contact and keeping new microbes from landing directly on the food. It also slows moisture loss from the surface, so what sits underneath tends to stay steadier in texture than uncovered leftovers. But the method isn't magic sterilization. Microbes can still exist inside the food, and the preservation depends on a calm partnership. Thorough cooking, clean handling, a complete seal, and cool storage. This is a cold storage method, not a room temperature method. Once you understand fat sealing as an air barrier, it becomes clear why the classic versions start with food that's already cooked and seasoned, then protected from the outside in. Rendered fat works well as a preservation barrier because it is hydrophobic, meaning it doesn't mix with water and doesn't provide an easy watery pathway for microbes. Bacteria and molds need moisture and access to nutrients. A thick fat layer interrupts both at the surface, especially for oxygen-loving organisms that would otherwise settle and grow where food meets air. In everyday terms, it behaves like wax on a jar of jam, an older kind of seal from before standardized lids were common. The protection is strongest when the fat fully covers the food with no cracks, because even a small gap can become a channel where air and moisture move, and where mold spores can find a foothold on exposed bits. Smooth, continuous coverage is protection. Patchy coverage is an invitation. Because this approach depends on an unbroken barrier, it naturally leads to confit, where cooking and storage under fat become one continuous process. Confit is a technique where meat is cooked slowly in fat and then stored, submerged in that same fat. The slow cooking tenderizes the meat and gently changes the surface, while the surrounding fat creates a sheltered environment. Duck confit is the classic example, but the method can apply to goose, pork, and other meats when there's enough fat to cover the pieces completely. In many traditions, confit begins with salting the meat up front. Salt curing adds another hurdle for spoilage and helps the seasoning penetrate evenly, so the finished meat tastes consistent from edge to center. The result isn't only preservation, it's also convenience. The meat is already cooked, so later you can crisp it, shred it, or warm it gently without starting from raw. That ready-to-use quality is part of why these methods became beloved, not just practical. But the most important detail remains simple: storage geometry. Everything has to stay under the fat, the way a stone stays under water in a stream. Once it's fully submerged, the outside world has a harder time reaching it. Duck confit and pork rillettes show two ends of the same fat preservation idea: whole pieces protected under fat, and shredded meat protected by fat. In duck confit, legs and thighs are cooked until tender, then stored as intact pieces submerged under a cap of fat. They keep their shape, and that makes later crisping easy. Rillettes often start with pork, or another meat cooked until it falls apart. Then it's shredded into a spread and mixed with some fat and finally sealed under a smooth layer of fat on top. Both are designed to be portioned and eaten over time, and both rely on the surface staying undisturbed between servings. Confit keeps fibers long and meaty. Rillettes become dense and spreadable. The shared logic is the same: cooked food, salted well, protected from oxygen. Full submersion matters because any exposed surface can become a spoilage foothold, even when most of the food is sealed. A small corner sticking above the fat can dry, oxidize, and collect mold spores. Once growth starts at an exposed spot, it can spread along the boundary where fat meets food. Air pockets are another weak point. If meat is packed loosely and fat flows around it without filling gaps, pockets can hold oxygen and moisture where you can't see it. That hidden space is exactly what you don't want in a method that depends on a clean barrier. This is why traditional instructions emphasize packing meat tightly, letting bubbles rise before the fat sets, and using enough fat to create a generous cap, not a thin skim. You want a calm, sealed surface, one continuous layer that cools into place. The same idea shaped potted meat traditions found in many cuisines. Potted meats were preserved by cooking, seasoning, and packing meat into a container, then sealing it under butter, lard, or another fat. The meat might be chopped, pounded, or shredded to remove air spaces. Spices and salt supported both flavor and stability, since potted meat was often eaten cold as a spread or sliced for quick meals. Butter was common for shorter-term potted foods because it's flavorful and easy to work with. Lard or rendered poultry fat can create a firmer, longer-lasting cap in cool conditions. The container mattered too. Clean crocks and jars reduced contamination, and narrower openings made it easier to form a thick cap that reached the edges without gaps. Pots also solve a practical problem: portioning. Small pots let you open one and keep the others sealed. Portioning becomes important because once the seal is broken, the conditions change quickly. A preserved store becomes something closer to ordinary leftovers. Still delicious, but no longer protected in the same way. Fat sealing is best for shorter spans, often measured in weeks rather than many months, because the barrier mainly blocks the outside world rather than changing the interior chemistry the way strong salt, high sugar, or deep acidity can. Even when food is well cooked and salted, it still contains moisture and nutrients. If storage temperatures are too warm, microbes that tolerate low oxygen can still multiply slowly under the fat. That's why historical uses treated fat-sealed meats as a way to bridge a season or hold cooked food safely until it could be eaten, not as a multi-year storage strategy. It also explains why confit, rillettes, and potted meats were traditionally kept in cool cellars, ice boxes, or other steady cold storage, where microbial growth slows and the fat stays firm. Cool storage matters for another reason. The barrier itself depends on temperature. Fat becomes softer as temperatures rise, and a soft or partially melted seal can't protect consistently. When fat warms, it can pull away from the sides of the container, creating channels where air can enter. Temperature swings can also create condensation, leaving little wet zones at the edges. Warmth speeds oxidation too, and that can push the fat towards stale, rancid flavors over time, especially if the container is opened frequently. In a cooler environment, the fat stays firm, the seal stays stable, and both microbial growth and oxidation slow down. That is why people often chose fats that set firmly at cool room temperatures for sealing, rather than oils that stay liquid and can't form a dependable cap. Once the seal is disturbed, the clock changes. Opening a fat seal exposes the food to air and turns a preserved store into something that should be eaten promptly. Each time you dig into the pot, you introduce oxygen, crumbs, and microorganisms from utensils and the environment. The surface becomes uneven. A perfect protective layer becomes harder to maintain. Some traditions smooth the surface after serving and add a little fresh melted fat to reestablish a cap, letting it cool back into a protective sheet. That can help, but the method still becomes less reliable with repeated openings. This is where small containers matter again. If you finish an opened pot quickly, you spend less time in the unsealed phase. Meanwhile, the remaining sealed pots stay untouched and stable. Clean utensils matter more than usual too, because contamination becomes the main enemy once the barrier has been broken. Avoiding double dipping isn't fussiness here, it's part of the method. With fat sealing covered, the next preservation approach returns to chemistry rather than barriers. Instead of excluding air, it changes the environment itself, using vinegar's acidity to make vegetables and other foods far less welcoming to spoilage. Vinegar. Pickling preserves food primarily by making the surrounding liquid acidic enough that many common spoilage bacteria struggle to grow. Vinegar's key acid is acetic acid, and when it surrounds vegetables, it lowers the pH into a range where bacteria that would multiply quickly on fresh produce slow down sharply. Acid is powerful, but it isn't an all-purpose stop sign. Some yeasts and molds can tolerate acidic conditions better than many bacteria, especially on surfaces that have direct access to air. Acidity also slows some enzyme-driven softening and off flavors, even though texture will still drift over time. Pickling likes predictability, and once acidity becomes the main barrier, the practical question is simple. Is that barrier strong and consistent from top to bottom? Pickling safety depends on the acidity of the finished brine, and that comes down to vinegar strength and how much you dilute it. In the United States, many distilled white vinegars and apple cider vinegars are labeled around 5% acidity, which is why tested pickling recipes often assume that starting point. Common pattern for vegetables is a 1.1 mix of 5% vinegar and water. It's a calm, repeatable ratio that lands many pickles in a reliable sour lane. But if you swap in a weaker vinegar or add extra water, the brine becomes less dependable because the final acidity drops and bacteria have more room to behave like they would in fresher conditions. This is also why homemade vinegar, while delicious, isn't a dependable base for shelf-stable pickles unless its acidity is measured and confirmed. Fermentation conditions vary, and so does the final strength. Some vinegars, certain rice vinegars, for example, are often milder. They can be wonderful for flavor, but they change the math for preservation. In pickling, the label is the simplest way to keep the brine's acidity predictable so you aren't guessing with your pantry. Vinegar pickles are built by packing food into a container and keeping it completely covered by a spiced vinegar brine. Continuous contact is the quiet rule. Any piece above the liquid line sits in a different environment, where oxygen and airborne molds have easier access and surface growth can begin, even when the brine below is properly acidic. Full coverage also keeps the brine composition steadier, because tiny dilution and evaporation effects show up at the surface first. If you've ever watched a jar settle after pouring, you can imagine the goal. Vegetables tucked in snugly, brine filling every gap, and the surface calm and level. Spices like dill, mustard seed, peppercorns, garlic, bay leaf, and chili flakes mainly shape flavor, and they hold their character well in acid, which is why they stay clear and recognizable in the finished pickle. Some spices contain compounds that can slow certain microbes, but they are not a reliable safety barrier compared with the acidity of the brine. The brine is the rule. The spices are the voice. Quick pickles are pickles for short-term eating, and their stability depends more on refrigeration than on long-term preservation steps. They're designed for speed, so the goal is getting vinegar flavor into the vegetable quickly. Thin slices help. Smaller pieces give the brine a shorter distance to travel, and salt can help move moisture and seasonings in and out. Because quick pickles aren't heat processed for shelf storage, they're typically kept cold. Cold slows microbial growth, while the brine continues to penetrate and season the food. Quick pickles can last days and often a couple of weeks in the refrigerator, depending on the vegetable, the salt level, and how cleanly they're handled. The most practical distinction is simple. Quick pickles are keep cold pickles, even if the brine tastes just as sharp as something you'd store in the pantry. Shelf-stable vinegar pickles follow the same sour logic, but they add another layer of control: heat processing and sealing. Packing the vegetables and brine into a jar is only the start. Heating reduces yeasts, molds, and many bacteria that might be present on food surfaces or on jar rims. Then sealing prevents new microbes from entering later. Heat cleans the jar's starting line. The seal keeps it that way. The goal isn't to cook pickles into softness. It's to set up a clean, acidic container where spoilage struggles to gain traction over months. Heat processing also helps drive out trapped air, which supports a good seal as the jar cools. When jars remain sealed and are stored in a cool, dark place, quality changes are usually slower and more predictable, even though color and crunch can still drift over time. Certain vegetables became pickling staples because their structures and flavors stay pleasant after acid reshapes them. Cucumbers are mostly water with crisp cell walls, so brine moves in quickly, and the main quality challenge becomes keeping them firm rather than making them flavorful enough. Onions soften in acid and become less sharp over time, which is why pickled onions can taste bright without being harsh, especially when sliced thin. Beets bring both sugar and strong pigments, so they become sweet-sour and deeply colored, and the brine often turns the same ruby shade as the beets themselves, like ink slowly blooming through water. Peppers pickle well because their skins and flesh can stay intact in acid, and the brine carries heat and aroma into the jar without needing long cooking. In general, vegetables with a firm structure and clear flavors keep their identity best in vinegar, which is why they show up again and again across styles. Pickle crispness is largely a race between acid softening and structure support. Acid gradually breaks down the plant cell glue that holds firmness, so pickles tend to soften the longer they sit, especially if the vegetables were overripe or stored too long before pickling. Salt helps by drawing out some moisture and firming the surface, which is one reason many classic pickle brines include both vinegar and salt, even when vinegar is the main preservative. Some modern recipes add calcium chloride, sometimes sold pickle crisp, because calcium can strengthen pectin structures in plant cell walls and help preserve a snappy bite. Traditional tannin sources, such as grape leaves or strong tea, are also used in some recipes because tannins can help limit softening in certain vegetables. Texture isn't only about preference. It's a clue that the brine chemistry and the vegetable's starting condition are working together. Bread and butter pickles use sugar along with vinegar, creating a sweet tart brine that changes the flavor profile without changing the core rule that acidity must remain high enough. Sugar rounds off vinegar sharpness and makes the brine feel fuller, so thin cucumber slices taste balanced rather than purely sour. This style often includes onions and uses warm spices and seeds such as mustard seed and turmeric, because sweetness highlights those flavors and makes them more noticeable in the finished pickle. Sugar does bind some water, but in vinegar, pickles, it's mainly there for flavor and mouthfeel, not as the primary safety barrier. Sweetness changes how acidity is perceived, but it doesn't erase the need for it. If bread and butter pickles are meant to be shelf-stable, they still rely on proper vinegar strength and, when used, proper heat processing. Pickled eggs show how vinegar can preserve a low-acid food, and also why guidance stays strict when the center of the food begins neutral. A hard-cooked egg becomes acidic from the outside inward, and that penetration takes time. The interior isn't instantly protected the way a thin cucumber slice is. For that reason, most cautious guidance leans toward keeping pickled eggs refrigerated while they cure and while they're stored, using cold as a second barrier alongside vinegar rather than relying on acidity alone. In a strong vinegar brine and cold storage, pickled eggs can keep for a few weeks. The whites become firmer and sometimes slightly translucent as acid changes their proteins, and the flavor becomes sharper and more settled with time. Over longer periods, eggs can become rubbery and overly sour, which becomes a quality limit even when safety is managed well. The way eggs depend on both vinegar and cold is a quiet example of how preservation often works best when methods are combined for coverage and consistency. Preservation became more dependable when people combined methods, because each method blocks a different path to spoilage. Salt limits usable water. Smoke dries and coats surfaces. Acid lowers pH. Heat reduces microbes and slows enzymes. Sealing prevents new contamination. Cold slows whatever survives, including many molds and yeasts that would otherwise take over exposed surfaces. Each barrier on its own has weak spots, but 2 or 3 together are like locking a front door and also closing the windows. The odds of trouble drop when microbes have to clear several hurdles at once. And because the work is shared, the food can often keep longer without needing an extreme amount of any single ingredient, which is especially helpful when you're trying to store food for weeks rather than days. In places where salt or sugar was expensive, stacking methods mattered even more. It helped stretch supplies while still extending shelf life. It also explains why salt with smoke, salt with drying, and salt with acid became such common combinations. 2 small advantages, stacked, can feel like one steady solution. Smoking and salting were paired so often because they protect in different directions, inside and outside. Salt moves inward with moisture, gradually making the interior less water-rich and less welcoming to fast spoilage. Smoke works mainly where it touches air. It dries the outside and deposits natural compounds on the surface, creating a skin that's less hospitable to many unwanted microbes. A salted cut can still spoil at the surface if it stays damp. A lightly smoked cut can still change inside if the interior remains watery and under-seasoned, especially when the piece is thick or has pockets where moisture lingers. When both are used, the interior and exterior become steadier together. The usual outside first and inside first failures slow down at the same time. Oxidation that turns fat stale also tends to move more slowly, and the surface is less likely to stay tacky enough for unwanted growth. Smoke's gentle heat helps the outer layer dry over hours, so curing first and then smoking often produces a steadier protective skin than smoking something that starts out very wet, outside and inside covered. Bacon and ham show how the size of a cut changes the curing plan, even when the same tools, salt, time, smoke, and cool storage, are used. Bacon usually starts as a thinner slab, so salt can reach the center relatively quickly. Smoke can be applied without the outside drying into a hard shell before the inside has caught up. A whole ham is much thicker, more like the difference between a steak and a large roast. The center sits far from the salty surface, and joints, skin, and dense muscle slow the process further. That extra distance is why larger pieces traditionally depend on longer, steadier curing and cool holding. It's also why thicker cuts often use gentler, longer brines, turning the cure into a controlled soak that has time to distribute salt evenly through the deepest meat. Same tools, different timeline. Some preserved meats stack acid with salt and drying because acid adds a useful barrier during the early stage when meat is still wet. In South African-style biltong, meat is often treated with vinegar along with salt and spices, then dried until it becomes firm and noticeably lower in moisture. The acidity makes the surface less friendly to many bacteria while drying is still underway, and the final dryness is what protects the finished strips during storage, provided the air around them stays fairly dry and the pieces are kept away from condensation or damp cloth. This layered approach uses acid to steady the first day, then relies on moisture removal to steady the weeks that follow. It also makes the food easier to transport and portion without leaks, because drying turns something heavy and perishable into something compact and stable. Chemistry. First, then dryness. Fermentation is often paired with cold storage, because once a food reaches the acidity you want, cooler temperatures slow further change and help it hold texture longer. A crock of fermented vegetables stays crisper and more consistent in flavor when kept cool. The bacteria that created the acid become less active. Enzymes slow down. Softening reactions lose speed. The same idea applies to cultured dairy. Fermentation shifts milk into a more stable, acidic form, and then cold storage stretches the useful window before it becomes sharply sour or develops extra gas, which can matter in tightly sealed containers. Cold doesn't replace fermentation. It simply puts a finished ferment into a slower gear. Whether that cool place is a cellar, an icebox, or a refrigerator, you can almost imagine the jar settling into quiet, the bubbles thinning, the flavors holding steady rather than rushing forward. Drying and sugaring can be combined when people want fruit that keeps well but still tastes like fruit, rather than like hard candy. Fruit pastes, such as quince paste, often called membrillo, are cooked with sugar to concentrate and bind water, then set in shallow slabs so they can dry further. As the surface dries, the paste becomes denser and more sliceable, almost like a soft confection you can cut cleanly. That extra drying step lowers stickiness and makes the surface less likely to weep syrup in storage, which helps the paste keep its shape when wrapped, stacked, or cut into portions. It also slows mold by lowering available water at the surface. Quince is naturally high in pectin, which helps the paste set firm as it concentrates. So this method blends fruit chemistry with water control in a form that stores neatly in paper wrapping or a covered tin in a cool, dark spot. Sweetness plus dryness. Two familiar tools working side by side. A good storage plan often combined environments, because temperature and humidity that help one food can harm another. Root cellars suit many roots and apples because cool air slows respiration and keeps skins from drying out too fast. And the higher humidity prevents shriveling over long weeks. But that same humidity can encourage rot or sprouting in foods that prefer dryness, like onions and garlic. It can also soften crisp, dry-cured rinds and invite surface mold on foods that want drier air. Pantries and cupboards favor dry goods and sealed foods, beans, grains, flour, cured items, and many jars, because they avoid condensation and are easier to keep clean and pest-resistant. They keep paper packaging from turning limp and mold-prone, keeping damp foods away from powders, and keeping strong-smelling or mold-prone items separated is part of the same quiet logic. A little airflow matters, too, so shelves don't become pockets of trapped humidity after one rainy day. Most households used several preservation methods in parallel because variety spreads risk and makes meals practical through the year. Smoking or salting might handle meat. Drying might handle herbs and some produce. Fermentation might handle vegetables. Canning or sugaring might turn peak season fruit into shelf-stable staples. If one batch turned, it didn't erase the whole plan, and the diet didn't collapse into a single kind of food. Preserved foods were also easier to trade than fresh foods because they could travel and wait instead of racing a spoilage clock. A surplus of one thing could be exchanged for something missing, which mattered most when a harvest was uneven or a winter ran long. Knowledge moved with the food as well. Families and neighbors passed along salt ratios, packing habits, and timing cues, because small, repeatable details often decided whether a batch stayed clean or turned. Keeping food submerged, keeping surfaces dry, keeping storage cool. Community memory made preservation more reliable, not through theory, but through patterns people could repeat. Seasonal timing shaped that whole portfolio, because preservation is easiest when ingredients are abundant and the weather supports the method. Harvests arrive in a short window, so autumn often concentrated the work. Cellars were stocked, jars were processed, fruits were dried. Ferments were started early enough to acidify before deep cold. Meat was cured or smoked, while temperatures were cooperative and cool nights reduced the speed of spoilage during handling. It's a slow calendar, written in jars and cellars. Spring, by contrast, was often the leanest stretch. Stored foods were older. Roots began to sprout or soften as dormancy ended. The next fresh harvest wasn't ready yet. People leaned harder on what kept best and on whatever they could trade for, stretching the last of the pantry until green shoots returned. Those seasonal pressures help explain why mechanical refrigeration, once it arrived, felt like more than convenience. It loosened the tight link between harvest season and food security. It changed which preservation skills were necessities versus traditions, while leaving the older methods available for flavor, thrift, and habit, still useful, still beloved, and still quietly clever. Traditional preservation was labor-intensive because the work had to match the food's timetable, not the cook's schedule. The day didn't begin with, "What do I feel like making?" It began with, "What is ripening right now, and what will spoil if I wait?" Many methods start with preparation steps that can't be skipped. Cleaning, trimming, salting by ratio, packing without air gaps, keeping food submerged, protecting batches from sudden warmth or moisture. The process also included maintenance, the kind of quiet, repetitive attention that doesn't look dramatic, but decides the outcome. Hanging foods had to be turned so they dried evenly. Ferments needed skimming and watching. Stored produce had to be sorted so one weak item didn't spread trouble to the rest. A harvest season could mean days of steady work that were less about cooking a meal and more about building a future pantry, one jar, one bundle, one bin at a time. That's why preservation knowledge often traveled as habits you could feel and repeat. How a brine should look, how a jar should seal, how a stored crop should feel in your hand, long before it ever became written instruction. Failures mattered because the loss was bigger than a single dish. A spoiled batch could erase weeks of effort and a meaningful share of stored calories. The obvious cost was wasted food. The quieter cost was uncertainty, because some spoilage problems don't announce themselves right away with dramatic smells or obvious growth. That's why many traditions built in conservative rules that were meant to keep food out of maybe territory. Discard anything that develops surface mold in an open crock. Refuse jars that don't seal correctly. Reprocess promptly when a barrier fails, or let the batch go. In the safest version of home preservation, a simple idea sits underneath it all. If the protective barrier is broken, the food is no longer part of the plan. That isn't meant to scare anyone. It's meant to explain why the old rules were so steady. When your winter depended on what you put away, the calm choice was often the firm one. Those caution habits also help explain why refrigeration felt so transformative when it arrived. It reduced the number of critical points where a single mistake could unravel the whole effort. But refrigeration didn't appear in the home as a single, sudden invention. It grew from a long line of attempts to make cold dependable. Before electric appliances, many households depended on harvested natural ice, well-insulated storage, and frequent delivery. It was workable, but fragile, tied to winter weather, local supply, and the rhythm of an ice route. In the late 1800s, mechanical refrigeration and machine-made ice began spreading through industries that needed steady cold, like breweries, meat packing, and food transport. Controlled temperatures reduced spoilage and made longer distribution possible. Industrial cold changed expectations first. Then those expectations drifted into the home. Milk that stayed sweet longer, meat that could wait a day, leftovers that felt less like a gamble. Once cold became something you could manufacture instead of something you had to capture, the logic of preservation began to shift from seasonal planning toward daily management. Early household refrigeration often meant an icebox paired with delivery, and the rhythm of cold was a schedule rather than a plug in the wall. The icebox cooled by gravity, ice above, food below, and it worked best when the door stayed closed, the meltwater drained well, and the most perishable foods lived closest to the ice. You can picture the small rituals: lifting a lid, feeling a breath of cool air, placing milk higher and sturdier foods lower, wiping a damp corner so odors didn't settle in. Over the early to mid-20th century, electric refrigerators gradually replaced that system as power became more widespread and appliance manufacturing scaled up. Early mechanical systems could use refrigerants that were effective, but not always friendly if they leaked, which is one reason later designs emphasized sealed systems, safer handling, and standardized servicing. The practical result was a new kind of reliability: cold that didn't depend on a pond freezing thick enough, and cold that stayed steady even when a heat wave arrived. Refrigeration changed everyday diets by making truly perishable foods easier to keep and less tied to immediate use. Fresh milk and cream could last longer between trips. Leftovers could be saved with a clearer safety margin. Meats and fish could be held briefly for planned cooking instead of being rushed into curing, smoking, or heavy salting the same day. Cold storage and refrigerated transport also widened the idea of fresh beyond local season, because produce could travel farther without collapsing on the way. That shift reduced the pressure to preserve everything at peak harvest. The penalty for waiting a day was lower. The penalty for buying smaller amounts more often was lower too. Refrigeration didn't eliminate preservation, but it changed the question from, how do I keep this for months, to, how do I keep this safely until I use it? As refrigeration took over the job of buying time, many older techniques faded from necessity, but stayed alive as traditions because they create flavors cold storage can't replace. Pickles, sauerkraut, cured meats, smoked fish, jams, and dried herbs persist because they taste like their method, not like their raw ingredients. And that difference is often the point. Fermentation adds acidity and complexity. Curing changes texture and deepens savoriness. Smoking brings aromatic compounds that linger in the air long after the fire is out. Sugaring turns fragile fruit into something glossy, spreadable, and stable. In many homes, these foods moved from being the backbone of winter survival to being a deliberate choice. Something you make because you want that exact profile in a sandwich, stew, snack, or breakfast. When preservation becomes optional, it can also become more creative, because the goal shifts from maximum shelf life to a balance of flavor, texture, and convenience. Modern food safety guidance still treats preserved foods with the same respect older households learned through hard experience, because the underlying risks didn't disappear. Low-acid canned foods still need high enough heat to be safe. Fermented foods still need enough salt and proper submersion to keep the right microbes in charge. Cured meats still depend on correct ratios and temperature control during the vulnerable early stages. Refrigeration helps, but it isn't a substitute for a sound process. It's an extra brake on growth and change once the method has done its work. That's why reliable preservation advice leans on measurable controls: percent salt by weight, known vinegar strength, tested canning times, rather than on taste alone. The more repeatable the method, the less you have to rely on luck. And those same preservation principles still guide everyday kitchen decisions, even when you aren't trying to stock a pantry for a season. Time and temperature still decide how quickly food changes. Moisture still decides how welcoming a surface is. Acidity still shapes which microbes can grow. Oxygen still influences both microbial growth and flavor drift from oxidation. Modern habits are built on the same control the conditions logic as salt, crocks, and root cellars. Putting leftovers into shallow containers so they cool faster. Keeping the refrigerator at a safe temperature. Not leaving cooked foods out for long stretches. Even packaging follows the old rules. Tight lids slow moisture exchange. Airtight wrapping slows oxidation and clean utensils reduce the number of new organisms introduced. The technology looks new, but the constraints are the same. These preservation facts connect to generations of practical problem solving, because each method is a way of negotiating with biology using simple controls. Whether someone stored apples away from ethylene-sensitive vegetables, packed cabbage under brine, stacked ice with sawdust, or sealed meat under fat, the goal was always to change the environment so food stayed usable longer. Refrigeration didn't erase that logic. It simply added a powerful, consistent tool that made the daily margin wider and the consequences of small delays less severe. The old techniques remain as reminders that food has a timeline, and that timeline can be stretched when you control water, temperature, acidity, oxygen, and contamination. And tonight, that's a gentle thought to keep. The kitchen doesn't demand perfection, only steady conditions and a little care repeated over time until things can wait for you. Good night, and may your rest be warm, quiet, and easy.